In order to find your purpose in life, you have to have 4 quadrants that sort of come together. One is what you love, what you are passionate about, things like that. The second is what you're talented at, so what you're actually good at. So if you love something but you're not good at it, then it's not a good fit. The third is what the world needs. So what does the world need you to be good at, and what talents does the world need you to perform for it? And the fourth is what you can make money off of. So there's all 4 of those quadrants need to come together in order for you to find your purpose in life.
You are now listening to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast with your host, Jorge Valenzuela.
This is education coach Jorge Valenzuela. Welcome to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast, where I provide all educators, whether instructional leaders or teachers, tips on how to be their best both personally and professionally. Now let's get into it. We're here today with the one and only Vriti Saraf. Vriti is a well-known education consultant, speaker, and founder of several nonprofits. I'm happy to have her on the show because I happen to be a very big fan. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
For the audience, I met Vriti at the Google home office in Soho, New York. As soon as she started speaking about education, I knew she really understood teaching and learning, which is rare. And when she talked about artificial intelligence in education, I knew that she was a rare hybrid of educator, tech expert, edupreneur, and amazing thinker. And now we're friends. Much respect to you.
Thank you. That's a very generous interpretation of my qualities, so appreciate that.
Vriti, you're already well known, but give us your backstory. How did you get into education, and what steps did you take to get where you are now as an education consultant and speaker?
Sure. Like many students growing up in the 80s and 90s in schools that didn't quite serve us as well as we wanted them to, I was an educational mess. I did not value education. I didn't go to my classes. I skipped a lot of things. I was a degenerate in school. And when I was in college, again, I did as much as I needed to do to pass my classes and maintain my scholarship, things like that. But I certainly did not understand the value of education at all. And so when I was graduating, I didn't know what to do with my life. I hadn't learned much in college, and I hadn't paved a pathway for myself. But the one thing I did know was that I didn't want to settle down and start a family the way that my parents wanted me to. So I had to figure something out. And I discovered this program called Teach for America. Had no idea what it was about, had no idea what I was getting myself into, and I applied. And I miraculously got in. And after college, I did a 2-year Teach for America stint, and it changed my life fundamentally. It changed my understanding of the world. It changed my understanding of education. It changed my understanding of myself. It was the first time I had ever done anything that was so hard and didn't give up. And I felt like it was outside of myself. If I had given up, I would have given up on 30 kids that I was teaching. And that was really what drew me into education. I understood what the education gap was. I understood what the value of education for low-income students was. I understood what the value of education, continuing education for an adult like me was. I think I learned more as a Teach for America alum and also as a core member. Also, I was getting my master's at the same time. So I learned more at that point than I think I had ever learned consciously when I was a kid. And so that just like dominoed into all the other things that I've done since. So I was a teacher for a little while. I was a dean. So I got asked to start coaching other teachers at the charter school network that I was at. And then I developed a program for other deans because we were scaling from 2 schools to 15 schools in Brownsville, Brooklyn, actually all over Brooklyn. And I built a program for other deans to learn about how to coach teachers, built a teacher residency program that was modeled after Teach for America, and had a few brief stints here and there. I did some adjunct professoring at the same time as teaching and worked at Pearson for a minute. But then I got this opportunity to travel around the world and build international schools. And so for 2.5 years, I was in Shenzhen, China, in India, in Bali, in Italy, all over the US, learning about the best school models and building the infrastructure for how teachers and school leaders get professionally developed and evaluated. And I was the head of professional learning at this network, and I built the entire ecosystem for how they do that. And it was such a remarkable experience because not only did I learn how to create these ecosystems for a network of schools, but because I was visiting schools all over the world, learning about what really incredible teachers were doing, I realized a lot of things about the international education ecosystem that I had never learned before. And one of them was that there's incredible pockets of talent everywhere around the world. But the downfall of that was that it wasn't being shared. It wasn't being recognized. And teachers actually weren't sharing as much with each other and providing resources to each other as much as they could. And while the entire world was being transformed by technology, education just wasn't. And so that's really where my journey with the startups started, which is I wanted to bring technology into education in a way that was purposeful and pedagogy aligned. And I also wanted educators to connect with each other in a way that was meaningful to them and in a way that was driven by them and not by a bureaucratic top-down system. So that's what brought me to the startup and the nonprofit that I run today, which is Ed3 Dow.
I'll be honest, this is probably the 50th episode about, and I have never been shocked with anyone's answer until today. Y'all, if you're out there watching and listening, you don't have to have things figured out right away. You don't. If you're able to explore your interests and your passions and find your purpose early on, phenomenal, fantastic. But that's not reality because our parents, they didn't have internet. They didn't have Google. They didn't have YouTube. They didn't know how to heal from trauma. They didn't know how to live a life of their own making. They did what they were told to: get married, have children, get a degree, and get a job that they'll be in forever. That's not our reality. I used to feel like, oh man, I'm late. No, we're perfect where we are. The way we are right now is perfect, but this version is going to be obsolete next month, next year, next 6 months. So get it together.
Fundamentally agree with that, George. And just to add a little bit more narrative to that, totally agree that like we need to forgive our parents for not being able to support us in the way that maybe we wanted. They just didn't have enough information. But what you said about finding purpose is a really important thing that I think we need to talk a little bit more about in a practical sense. So for some time in the 90s and the early 2000s, we wanted our students and our children to really drive towards what they loved and what their talents were. But that's actually not enough, right? Because students also have to figure out what they're going to be able to create a sustainable life with, right? And so one of the concepts that has been really a driving force for our organization and for me is the concept of ikigai. It's a Japanese concept. It's been manufactured a little bit for the Westernized audience, but for the purposes of this conversation, we'll keep it at the ikigai framework. And basically what ikigai says is that in order to find your purpose in life, you have to have 4 quadrants that sort of come together. One is what you love, right? What you are passionate about, things like that. The second is what you're talented at. So what you're actually good at. So if you love something, but you're not good at it, then it's not a good fit, right? The third is what the world needs, right? So what does the world need you to be good at? And what talents does the world need you to perform for it? And the fourth is what you can make money off of, right? So there's all 4 of those quadrants need to come together in order for you to find your purpose in life. Now, if you're only pursuing what you can make money off of and what you're good at, but you're not pursuing what you're passionate about and what the world needs, then the purpose isn't quite there. It's just a vocation. And so those 4 quadrants really make a huge difference when you're thinking about what kind of purpose and what kind of life do I want to live in a way that's sustainable to me and I'm intellectually stimulated all the time.
Folks, rewind this and start taking notes. This is an episode where we're learning. Thank you, Vriti. Thank you so much. If you're watching this on YouTube or listening on Spotify or iTunes, please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the like button and share this episode with your family, friends, and colleagues who are interested in self-improvement through lifelong learning. And now for a word from one of our sponsors.
We had the pleasure of listening to George this morning on project-based learning, and he shared his story that his aunt encouraged him to go into education. And she was absolutely right. He is so talented at sharing information in a way that is easy to digest and is inspiring to go back and actually implement and make change.
So my takeaway is that Mr. Valenzuela was very inspiring. He was very motivational and helped me to think about a new way of getting my teachers excited.
When I set out to do a workshop, my key deliverable is energy. And this momentum is used to make connections, inspire, educate, and ultimately transform the audience so that they're compelled to take that same energy back to their schools and communities. And although we have fun, we tackle the hard topics of today, like educational policy, pedagogy for improving curriculum and instruction, and empowering today's students by connecting our work to the needs of the workforce. So please consider lifelong learning defined for your next keynote, workshop, or conference, and overall instructional and educational coaching needs. My name is George, and I hope to connect with you soon.
We would love to have him come and do some work with us and help us be a little more successful and help our students to be more successful.
I move around a lot of schools, and we're seeing a huge disconnect. A lot of teachers that have come from non-traditional pathways, especially in the past few years. And so just interactions, expectations is really the first step. All of my teachers, raise your right hand, and please repeat after me. I promise that I will speak positivity into my students. All of my administrators, all my directors, all my principals, all my coordinators, raise your hands, please, your right hand, and repeat after me. I promise that I will speak positivity into my faculty and staff. Thank you. You're doing a lot of work with artificial intelligence and Web3. Vriti, for someone who doesn't understand the intersection of AI, Web3, and education, how would you break it down for them?
So let's start with Web3 because it's the larger ecosystem here. So Web3 is simply the evolution of the internet. It encompasses a lot of different technologies, including AI, blockchain, AR, VR, the internet, spatial computing, anything you can think of is encompassed under Web3. The main difference between Web3 and Web2, and the reason Web3 hasn't been manifested yet, is because Web3 has an underlying principle of decentralization and data ownership. So basically, in Web2, you have all these technologies also. You've got AI, you've got the internet, you've got everything. But in Web2, a lot of our data and a lot of our ability to engage with the internet is really monopolized. And it's owned by the large companies like Google and Facebook and things like that. And a lot of the times, in order for us to engage with other people or with businesses or things like that, we have to go through a centralized platform, and our data gets extracted and our data gets owned by those platforms. The main difference between Web2 and Web3 is that Web3 allows you to own your own data and allows you to actually have sovereignty of your information and your data. And we're not quite there yet, right? Most of the things that we do on the internet, our data is extracted from us and we actually don't get to own it. And there isn't a decentralized ecosystem that allows us to really engage in a peer-to-peer way instead of a peer-to-monopoly way. And so that's the main difference between Web3 and Web2. But AI is actually a technology that exists in both realms. It exists under the sort of Web 1, 2, 3, whatever, phase you're in, 4, whatever. It exists under those sort of ecosystems. And the reason all of this connects so well to education, and the reason it's so important to education, the reason I got into it, is because education is one of those ecosystems that have emerged to become very bureaucratic. It has become this very top-down, institute-central sort of organizational model that basically disseminates information to students and collects their data and doesn't really empower them in a way that we want to empower citizens to own their own, as we said, ikigai, purpose, whatever it is. And so the thing that we want to do with Web3 is we want to instill these decentralized frameworks. So we're talking about data ownership. We're also talking about things like democratized learning and decentralized and personalized learning. So basically being able to find your own learning pathway instead of having to go to a college or a university to give you a certification. The idea of being able to collect different certifications from many different institutions and organizations. Maybe it's a community college, maybe it's an Ivy League, maybe it's an after-school program, and creating your own academic resume that is lifelong, that you own, the data that you own. So you never have to call a bursar or a transcript registrar again to get your transcript. It always lives with you, and you can stack it as you continue learning. So that's where all the Web3 comes in. And then the AI part, and then I'll let you ask your question there. And then the AI part comes in because AI helps us automate a lot of these things and personalize a lot of these things. Web3 is a little bit tedious in the way that you can generate data, but AI can really expedite that. So I'll pause there because I know that was a lot of information.
All my technology supervisors running systems or developing systems in your schools, this is the person you want to hire. The reason why she's on the show is because there's a simplicity in the way that she explains it, but the expertise is undeniable. And that's an important thing. You've got people in jobs that can't do the job, don't understand the job, but they're getting paid for it. And then they're getting in front of school boards that don't understand the job either. And they're just regurgitating information from online and thinking it's helping kids, and it's not. But anyway, hire Vriti. She is the right person. But I have a question. The bursar at Old Dominion University, where I adjunct and I'm a doctoral candidate, they will never allow us to bypass them for transcripts. Can you explain a little bit about that? Because now I'm interested.
So there's going to be a point where they're going to have to. And the reason for that is because there's a huge movement right now around something called micro-credentials on chain. Basically, the idea is instead of you getting a credential that lives solely in your transcript, the credential can actually live in a digital wallet that you own, and you can stack those credentials across many different institutions. And the reason why many colleges and universities are going to be pressured to use more decentralized ecosystems is because, as we know, there is a huge decline in registrations at universities, and students, especially Gen Z and further, are choosing not to go to university. And so universities are going to have to find alternative methods of revenue generation. And one of the great ways to generate revenue is by creating decentralized coursework and decentralized credentials that students can take even if they're not enrolled in that university. So continuing education units, things like that. And that's what a lot of universities are actually reverting to now, and they're actually finding a lot of success with. A lot of the universities we work with are actually generating way more revenue through that than just sole registrations. And so in order for you to have a credential that is living in a digital wallet, you need to implement some infrastructure within your university in order to move that credential from your sort of bursar or transcript into a digital wallet. It can live in both places. It doesn't have to live in either or. But in order for it to live in the digital wallet, you have to have some digital infrastructure. And in order for universities to take advantage of creating these decentralized courses so that they can generate revenue, they're going to have to implement that infrastructure. And that movement is very active right now. It is, if you think about in the K-12 space, the concept of a graduate profile, that's taken over a lot of different districts in the United States. Those graduate profiles are turning into competencies that are turning into micro-credentials that would be living in a digital wallet. Now imagine when a student is applying for a university and they actually get to see all of these different credentials that students actually have in their digital wallet from all of these different providers that have portfolios attached to them or have artifacts attached to them or whatever it is in order for them to evaluate the student. The university then has to, again, figure out how to evaluate those things and then port them into their own credentialing ecosystem. So there's a lot of different sort of avenues with which the universities are going to face credentialing from a fiscal perspective, from a business perspective, from an applicant perspective, from a demand from students perspective. And so that movement has started and it is not going back.
Now for a word from one of our sponsors. If you're a STEM and PBL teacher like me, you're always on the lookout for new project ideas and resources. You know George does PBL, and I'm telling you, look no further than SmartLab. SmartLab really has a fresh take on STEM and PBL. I'm proud to be a partner, and they sponsor the podcast. But just don't take my word for it. Check out what other educators are saying about SmartLab.
When students enter into SmartLab, they are allowed to think outside of traditional norms.
It gives them a lot of agency. They feel empowered and important. I think that's one of the biggest benefits of the SmartLab environment and the way the project process is set up.
SmartLab becomes this place where they can do those things and have the time and space to communicate better and even deal with social emotional stuff. They're having a bad day. A SmartLab's a place where we can change the pace of what they're learning to match their mental needs for the day. And that comes back tenfold later on when they want to be there and they want to learn and they want to do stuff and they feel safe and they feel like they can get the things they need.
That's one of the big benefits of being in more of a collaborative environment is it makes you have to work. It makes you have to be accountable.
Please look in this episode's show notes for a link to connect with SmartLab. Vriti, tell us more about the portrait of a graduate and also your new work about the portrait of a teacher.
Yeah, what we are trying to really help people understand is that in order for a student to be happy, agentic, and critical thinking, a teacher needs to be happy, agentic, and critical thinking, right? There's a huge misalignment between how we teach teachers and how we expect teachers to teach students. And so the work that we're doing around the portrait of a graduate, or the work that collectively different districts are doing around the portrait of a graduate, is awesome because it helps us identify the competencies that graduates graduating from their school really need in order to thrive in school, thrive beyond school. But why are we leaving the teachers out of it? And so the concept that Ed3 Dow is developing is something called the portrait of a teacher. So what are the competencies that a teacher ready for the age of AI really needs? And they're slightly different than what teachers needed 100 years ago. Yes, it still involves understanding pedagogy. Yes, it still involves empathizing and understanding and having self-awareness with students. Yes, it still involves building relationships, but it also involves technological savviness, right? It also involves being able to use AI in a way that acts as a digital friend or a thought partner or a teammate, right? So how do we actually identify what these competencies are for teachers, and how do we then use those competencies to backwards map what our evaluation systems look like, what our professional development systems look like, what our hiring systems look like? And so that's a portrait that we're developing, and we think that it's going to be, and we're going to make it open source, and we think it's going to be really useful for districts and for schools to really understand a few things. Number one, how do we evaluate our current teachers and how do we upskill them in emerging technologies? Number two, how do we hire new teachers and that are ready for that sort of new challenge of emerging tech? Number three, how do we embed these skills into graduate school programs so that we're actually churning out more graduates that are ready for this? And then this is my favorite one. Number four, how do we find talent outside of the educational ecosystem so that we're building teachers that are not just traditional teachers that are traditionally certified? Can there be teachers emerging in different ways and in different places? Can there be teachers that you don't see as traditional teachers that are maybe part-time tutoring, things like that? And can we certify them with the portrait of a teacher so that they can actually provide learning experiences beyond a school? And then that goes back to the credentialing conversation, right? So if we can get more educational and learning experiences across our entire city and learning ecosystem, can students then be activating learning experiences outside of the school and earn credentials for it? So there's this like huge conversation and big sort of ecosystem development that we're looking at, which is how do we certify teachers for the future of learning and for technology? And then how do we get students certified in learning experiences that are beyond the school atmosphere?
What's the primary message of your coaching work with educators on AI and Web3?
Ed3 Dow, we're a nonprofit that helps educators upskill in emerging technology, specifically AI and Web3. And we have a very specific perspective on how emerging technology needs to be integrated into schooling in the classrooms. What we're seeing, and we've got a lot of pet peeves around this, what we're seeing is specifically for AI, that educators are learning really bad habits and practices with AI. Educational AI consultants and whatnot are teaching educators about prompt engineering and about lesson plan generation. And although those are great places to start, that's where oftentimes these trainings end. And if a teacher is not familiar with a pedagogy and isn't comfortable with the sort of foundations of a pedagogy, like project-based learning or UDL or elements of classroom management, like restorative practices, then implementing AI into your ecosystem or using AI to generate a lesson plan is still going to churn out garbage. And so we really want to make sure with the work that we do with educators that we are connecting AI with pedagogy. What we do is we partner with universities and graduate school programs for education to provide asynchronous online coursework that really connects pedagogy, very specific pedagogy, with emerging technology. So some of the work that we've done is we have created a universal design for learning and AI course that basically helps you understand the elements of UDL, integrate it into your practice, and use AI to both enhance your ability to plan for it, your ability to implement it, and your ability to use AI with students. And the AI, the way that we're looking at it, is from the UDL perspective, right? So it really creates a much deeper understanding of how to actually implement emerging technology. Another course that we have is immersive learning and AR and VR. So how do you use augmented reality and virtual reality in a way that really immerses and contextualizes learning through simulations for your students, right? Another course that we're developing in the next 2 months is a project-based learning and AI course. Another one is restorative practices and AI course. And so all of these courses are really fundamentally aligned to research-based pedagogies. And that's really what our perspective is. And we don't love that there's so many tools and practices out there that are just creating these blind barriers for teachers that are saying, hey, you'll be able to save time with this. And although that's important for teachers because teachers are so overwhelmed with so much work, and we know that, it just doesn't build the right habits and practices, and it's not going to help us reimagine education. It's going to help us maintain the status quo that we know isn't working. Our goal is really to evolve education and reimagine education, but using research-based pedagogy that we know that works.
What a perfect way to end this show. Vriti, how can people find you so they can book you to speak at their conference, school, or event?
First, visit our nonprofit website. It's Ed3 Dow, ed3dao.com. But if you'd like to engage with me, I have a website, vritisaraf.com, and you can send me a message there if I can help and support the work that you guys are doing.
That's it for this episode. Until next time, this is the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast. Whether you're a teacher or administrator, you lead by walking alongside your students and your staff. You teach them what to do, you model for them. Let's say you're in a situation where you don't know what to do and you bring in a coach or a resource, you learn alongside them. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Now, the second thing is this. Give your people feedback, not pushback. Whoever you push back on, whether physically or verbally, they're going to do it right back immediately. And if they're intimidated by our position, our status, they're going to do it behind our backs and ruin our programs. My guy. I want to leave you on this note. Trajectories can be changed. When I was in 10th grade, here's a snapshot of who I was in 10th grade. There's a rapper named Rakim. I'm not sure if you guys know about Rakim, but he used to say, it's not where you're from, it's where you at. And I played that on my headphones at 16 years old every day until I believed it. And I'm showing you this because I'm seeing versions of this throughout American schools. This is your reality of what you have to face. If I can do it, any kid can do it, but they have to work hard. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast with Jorge Valenzuela.